The 9,377th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the questions concerning Haiti. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Haiti to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them a document, S/2023/519, the text of the resolution submitted by Ecuador and the United States of America. The Council is ready to proceed to vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall put the draft resolution to vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in the document S/2023/519 please raise their hand? Thank you. The result of the voting is as follows. The draft resolution received 15 votes in favor. The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously as Resolution 2692/2023. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. If I may, I give the floor, and to begin with, to the representative and ambassador of the United States of America, Your Excellency.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues. The United States continues to stand with the people of Haiti in their time of need. As Secretary Blinken recently told the CARICOM plenary, we are working with our partners to, quote, help the Haitian people shape their futures and restore the country's democratic order, unquote. Today's reauthorization of BNU's mandate is an important step toward these goals, and the United States was proud to vote for this resolution and to work closely with our co-pen holder, Ecuador, to achieve a consensus text. BNU continues to be a positive force in Haiti. It continues to support the Haitian National Police and address gang violence that has plagued the Haitian people. This resolution encourages member states to provide security support to the Haitian National Police through deployment of a specialized force, acknowledging Haiti's repeated calls for help from the international community. This mandate renewal also asks the Secretary General to submit a written report outlining all the ways the United Nations can enhance the security situation in Haiti. This includes the potential for a peacekeeping operation, police training, or a non-UN multinational force. The United States looks forward to the Secretary General's recommendations on how to do that most effectively. We also appreciate that the strengthened mandate seeks to address Haiti's humanitarian and political challenges. We look forward to BNU's engagement with the government and other stakeholders to tackle these crises, which compound the ongoing security challenges. Colleagues, let's be clear. Our work is far from finished. Adoption of this mandate is a positive step, but we must do more. The United States will continue to work with the BNU, the Haitian government, and the international community to drive progress forward and help the Haitian people secure a more just and peaceful future. We urge all council members and all member states to join us. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I thank the Ambassador of the United States. I now invite and give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, as we speak, Haiti is deeply mired in multiple political, security, development, and humanitarian crises, and the situation continues to deteriorate. During the recent deliberation of the Council, members of the Council and the country region were expressing deep concerns over the situation in Haiti, or expected BNU to better implement its mandate and the international community and the United Nations to render more support and services for Haiti. China shares the concerns and aspirations of us all. Thanks to the joint efforts of members of the Council, China included, the just adopted Resolution 2692 sends a positive signal that the international community will help Haiti find a Haitian-owned and led solution and support BNU in playing a greater role in improving the situation in Haiti. Mr. President, the fundamental solution to the Haitian crisis lies in advancing the political process. The resolution just adopted by the Council calls on all Haitian parties to engage in inclusive dialogue, reach the broadest possible consensus on political transition arrangements, and set a timetable and roadmap for holding free, fair, and credible elections as soon as possible. We call on all parties and factions in Haiti to, as required by the resolution, truly show their responsibilities and advance the political process with an urgent sense of urgency in the fundamental interests of the country and its people. The most urgent task in resolving the crisis in Haiti is to stabilize the security situation. The massive inflows of weapons and ammunition into Haiti from abroad is an important factor fueling the rampant gun violence, and no amount of support for Haitian police will make any difference unless the flow is stopped. At China's repeated request and insistence, the resolution just adopted strongly urges all countries to immediately stop supplying arms and ammunition to the Haitian gangs and their supporters, and to take all measures to curb arms trafficking and smuggling. We call on members of the Council to implement the call in real and master political determination and demonstrate political will when considering the renewal of Resolution 2652 by formally taking a legally binding decision thereon. An effective means of resolving the crisis in Haiti lies in the support of the international community. The resolution just adopted requests the Secretary General to report on a range of options of support to Haiti available to the United Nations. China supports the United Nations in providing more assistance to Haiti and always believes that the key to resolving the Haitian conundrum is in the hands of the Haitian people themselves. The 30-odd years of the UN practice in Haiti have shown that quick fixes implemented from the outside often fail to deliver long-term results or help Haiti truly emerge from the crisis. Before taking the next step, the United Nations should fully learn from the past, fully listen to the views of all parties, and fully consider the will of the Haitian people. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China, and I now give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brazil hopes that the newly adopted mandate will provide BNU with enhanced financial resources and the necessary means to effectively support Haiti. We commend the tireless efforts of the penholders, Ecuador and the United States, and the active engagement of the membership, which have led to a balanced and meaningful outcome. Throughout the negotiation, Brazil's main objective was to mobilize efforts to help Haiti overcome its economic, security, and political crisis. We have consistently emphasized the importance of reinforcing BNU in terms of security, capacity, and resources to enable the mission to fulfill its mandate. We commend the results achieved in that regard. Enhancing BNU's capacity to support national authorities in preventing and responding to sexual and gender-based violence and in protecting children also represent a significant improvement. Additional measures to prevent the illicit trafficking and diversion of small arms, light weapons, and ammunition could also serve as a crucial step in curbing the escalation of violence. In the upcoming days and months, the situation in the country needs to remain at the forefront of our attention. The Council should closely monitor the evolving situation on the ground while considering potential new measures. In this regard, we look forward to the Secretary General's report outlining the full range of options the United Nations can provide to enhance the security situation in Haiti. Any possible security assistance to be provided should fully align with the needs and aspirations of the Haitian people and be developed in close collaboration with all relevant actors in the country. The political viability and the long-term effectiveness of such security assistance would depend on the will of key stakeholders in Haiti to set aside differences in order to collectively address the root causes of the many challenges faced by the country, in particular poverty, inequality, and instability. It's only through genuine engagement and a spirit of compromise that Haitian-led solutions can be achieved. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
President, I did not request the floor under this agenda item, Haiti.
My apologies, I was informed to the contrary, but we will proceed further. I now invite and give the floor to the representative of Ecuador, Mr. Ambassador.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm grateful for the support received for the resolution to extend and strengthen the mandate of the United Nations Integrated Office in Haiti, BINU, that was tabled by Ecuador and the United States. I'd also like to recognize the valuable and constructive contributions made by all delegations of the Council at a time at which Haiti needs it most. We hope that this unanimous adoption will send out a clear and robust message to the heads and members of the gangs that are besieging Haiti. We call on the Department of Political and Peacekeeping Affairs and BINU to ensure strategic communications in that sense. President, the resolution calls on all relevant bodies, including those with the ability to influence the armed groups, to bring an end to the blockade on supplying local markets and to the harm made to food sources. All of this, welcoming the recommendations of the Secretariat's note on Resolution 2417 on hunger and conflict in the context of the acute food insecurity crisis experienced in Haiti. We have also strengthened the humanitarian access approach and that relating to protection of humanitarian personnel. It also includes child protection as a cross-cutting and priority issue and incorporates efforts under the Youth, Peace and Security agenda. It almost doubles the ceiling of personnel providing advice and assistance in police and penitentiary matters. Under the United Nations Police Commissioner, moving that from 42 to 70, and it asks BINU to step up and build capacities to provide support and security so that its personnel can be displaced to carry out and can move around to carry out their mandate. It strengthens language on tools to combat the illicit arms trafficking and on the political process. And finally, the Council has also stated its case on the specialized support force for the National Haitian Police that was requested by the country. Furthermore, it asks the Secretary General to report on the full range of options for security support that the UN can provide, including the possibility of a peace mission. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, we have made important steps forward, but this is not the final goal, but rather a robust starting point on which we can build. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is pleased to have voted in favour of this resolution, which extends and strengthens the mandate for the UN's vital work in Haiti. It is particularly welcome that the resolution paves the way for the Council to respond to Haiti's requests for security support in the context of the steeply deteriorating security, humanitarian, political, and economic situation. Only last week, the Council heard powerful accounts from civil society and the region on the appalling human rights abuses being committed by gangs in Haiti. Conflict-related sexual violence in particular has spiraled in recent months, and the ability of people to live their lives normally, to move freely, to go to school or to hospitals has been tragically disrupted. So, like others, we, the United Kingdom, welcome this resolution and look forward to considering in due course the options presented by the Secretary-General. I now resume my function as President of the Council and give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Mr. President, I make this statement on behalf of the members of the A3, namely Gabon, Mozambique, and Ghana. While we note the broad support that the Council has just granted for the cause of peace and stability in Haiti, our position is that more could have been done, and indeed more should be done. We acknowledge the Council's efforts to strengthen BNU's Police and Corrections Unit and to scale up its strategic and advisory support to enhance the training and investigation capacities of the Haitian National Police. We are, however, mindful of the limitations of BNU in terms of the assistance it can provide. It was in that regard that the A3 sought during the negotiations to have the Council demonstrate a much clearer commitment of its readiness to respond to the request of the Haitian government in support of processes by member states, including regional states, to put together a robust security force to assist the Haitian National Police in re-establishing public order and peace across the country. We believe that the deteriorating situation in Haiti should compel the Council to give a timely and definite response of support when the Secretary-General presents the report that we have requested of him in 30 days' time. The challenges facing Haiti are, however, not insurmountable, and the resilience of its people attests to this fact. Indeed, we note small but encouraging shifts in the dynamics of the situation and welcome the supportive role that regional states, including the CARICOM, have assumed. This gives confidence that working together and quickly, we can support the people of Haiti to address their humanitarian, political, and security challenges. We therefore thank the co-pen holders, Ecuador and the United States, for facilitating the unanimous adoption of Resolution 2692, which provides through BNU a continuing capacity for the United Nations to support the people of Haiti through its good offices role. While the resolution may not have responded fully to all the immediate needs of the Haitian people, it sets the right direction for all stakeholders to reach an agreement towards a democratic political process and advance a Haitian-led and Haitian-owned solution to the crisis. Gabon, Ghana, and Mozambique take this opportunity to encourage all friendly countries in the region and beyond to sustain their efforts and support for Haiti, especially for the political processes and the restoration of public order. We urge the Council to maintain the situation in Haiti at the forefront of its attention. We must do everything possible to support the Haitian people and their government to restore the glorious and historic foundations of their statehood. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ghana, and I now invite the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, by voting in favor of Resolution 2692, the United Arab Emirates reaffirms its full support for BNU and its role to assist Haiti back on the path towards peace and stability. The ongoing and horrific violence, including abhorrent reports of sexual and gender-based violence employed by armed gangs on the people of Haiti, remains completely unacceptable. The security and political situation in Haiti must be addressed simultaneously. While the Council continues its discussions on how to best respond to the deteriorating security situation, we once again call on all relevant stakeholders to work towards an inclusive and inter-Haitian dialogue for a Haitian-led and owned political settlement. This remains critical for the sake of the people of Haiti and the wider region. We therefore welcome the resolution's increased recognition of the important role of regional countries and organizations, including CARICOM, to support Haiti towards stability and security. Mr. President, Haiti remains one of the most vulnerable countries to natural disasters and climate change. Just last month, we witnessed the heavy rainfalls and floods which followed the earthquakes that hit Haiti. The implications of climate change have aggravated the already dire food, water, and humanitarian situation, destroying critical infrastructure as well as impeding the capacity for humanitarian actors to reach those who are most in need. We therefore welcome the resolution's inclusion of a paragraph proposed by the UAE which recognizes that the adverse impact of climate change and natural disasters are exacerbating the humanitarian situation in Haiti, further fueling instability. We applaud the penholder's constructive approach on this critical issue, as well as across the text, reflected in the unanimous adoption today, a much-needed sign of Council unity. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the UAE for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Haiti, Your Excellency.
Monsieur le Président.
President. The Haitian government, through me, welcomes the unanimous adoption of Resolution S/2023/519, extending the mandate of BNU until the 15th of July 2024. I'd like to take this opportunity to express the gratitude of the Haitian delegation to the members of the Security Council for the efforts they made to progress the Haiti file. President, we welcome the renewal of BNU and the expansion of its mandate, which takes into account the new reality and challenges in the country. Some of the progress here is encouraging. For instance, we note the strengthening of the office's police unit, the appeal made for cooperation among member states to prevent the trafficking and diversion of illicit arms, the appeal to member states to contribute to the basket fund for security assistance and to provide security support to the national police. We hope that sufficient resources will be made available to BNU so that it can do its work efficiently and effectively. President, the extension of BNU's mandate is, of course, a step in the right direction, but it will not alone suffice to help the government to address the security challenge in Haiti. We must pool our efforts and find innovative ideas that respond to the complex situation. That, in order to ensure the long-awaited robust international assistance is provided to support the efforts of the Haitian National Police in combating the heavily armed gangs. In this regard, we're grateful to all those countries willing to contribute to responding to the request made by the Prime Minister, Mr. and Dr. Ariel Henry. President, the context in Haiti hasn't changed. The daily lives of Haitians remain marked by kidnappings, gang violence, and an increase in humanitarian needs in all departments of the country. According to investigations by human rights organizations, violence has claimed the lives of no less than 563 people in the area of Port-au-Prince in the first half of 2023. More than 260 people were abducted from their homes or from public places. Today in Haiti, all eyes are fixed on this important Security Council meeting. the population is awaiting a concrete decision and solution on the deployment of an international force. That wasn't the case, and there is great disappointment at that fact. Therefore, by way of conclusion, I would like to repeat the words of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Haiti, His Excellency Jean-Victor Généus, at the 6th of July meeting, and I quote, "The Security Council's action is decisive to rekindle hope in Haiti and to allow the people to hope for a better tomorrow." Thank you.
I thank the representative of Haiti for their statement. There being no more names or no other indications to speak, this meeting is now adjourned. The 9,378th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is Women, Peace and Security, Sexual Violence in Conflict. The agenda is adopted. May I begin by warmly welcoming the distinguished ministers and other high-level representatives. Your presence here today underscores the importance of this subject matter, which is under discussion in front of the Council. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Algeria, Argentina, Australia, Austria, Bangladesh, Belgium, Botswana, Cambodia, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Croatia, Cyprus, Denmark, Dominican Republic, Ethiopia, Georgia, Germany, Greece, Guatemala, India, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Iraq, Ireland, Italy, Kazakhstan, Latvia, Lebanon, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Malaysia, Mexico, Morocco, Myanmar, Namibia, the Netherlands, Pakistan, Poland, Portugal, the Republic of Korea, Romania, Sierra Leone, Slovakia, Slovenia, South Africa, Spain, Thailand, Ukraine, Uruguay, and Yemen to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Ms. Pramila Patten, Special Representative of the Secretary-General on Sexual Violence in Conflict. I give floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we would like to express our reservations regarding the participation of the SRSG on conflict-related sexual violence, who's participating in this meeting. As everyone is well aware, Ms. Patten stated that Russian soldiers were supposedly given Viagra so they could rape Ukrainian women. Then, a recording of her conversation with representatives of who she thought were representatives of the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, were leaked online. In that conversation, she admitted that she does not have any reliable information about this. Thus, Ms. Patten was abusing her status as SRSG and disseminating false information regarding a UN member state. We would like our opposition to her participation in this meeting to be recorded. Thank you, President.
I note and thank the representative of the Russian Federation for her statement. If I may continue, we also invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Ms. Noor Hser, Civil Society Representative, and Nadine, Survivor Champion. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite His Excellency Mr. Silvio Gonzanto, Deputy Head of the European Union Delegation of the United Nations, to participate in this meeting. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of the Council members to document S/2023/476, a letter dated the 26th of June 2023 from the Permanent Representative of the United Kingdom to the United Nations addressed to the Secretary-General, transmitting a concept paper on the item under consideration. She needs to. She's just. Thank you. I now give the floor to the Special Representative of the Secretary-General on Sexual Violence in Conflict, Ms. Pramila Patten.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to express sincere appreciation for the leadership of the United Kingdom in convening this open debate on promoting implementation of Security Council resolutions on conflict-related sexual violence. I warmly welcome the civil society briefers from the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Myanmar. As ever, the lived experience of survivors such as Nadine and advocates like Hser must shape global solutions. Survivors are the moral compass of this mandate. I just want to flag, Mr. President, that to highlight survivors' voices, the UN Action Against Sexual Violence in Conflict Network, which I chair and which comprises of 24 UN entities, has organized an exhibition titled A Conflict-Related Sexual Violence Survivor's Journey. I really welcome all here today to visit the exhibition in the visitors' lobby during the course of the day. Distinguished members of the Security Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we meet today as the trend lines for conflict-related sexual violence are worsening. The world is facing the highest number of conflicts since World War II, while the number of people forced to flee their homes has reached a first-ever record of 110 million. Rising militarization and arms proliferation are bringing conflicts across the globe to boiling point, creating the conditions for unimaginable and unrelenting cruelty. Gang rape, sexual slavery, and other forms of sexual violence are being used as a tactic of war, torture, and terrorism to subjugate and displace populations. In this time of unprecedented global turbulence, new threats have emerged from the largely ungoverned digital space. Climate-related insecurity and displacement have exacerbated competition for scarce resources, in turn increasing intercommunal violence, including sexual violence. Every new wave of warfare brings with it a rising tide of human tragedy, including new waves of war's oldest, most silenced, and least condemned crime. And yet, the promise expressed by the Security Council resolutions on women, peace, and security, focusing on conflict-related sexual violence, is prevention. They represent a commitment to bring all tools to bear to break the seemingly endless cycles of sexual violence, impunity, and revenge. Even as this council meets once again to take up this issue, violations continue to shatter lives and livelihoods, destabilize communities, and displace hundreds of thousands around the world. The singular focus of this council must be to bridge the gap between resolutions and realities, between our highest aspirations and operations on the ground. Excellencies, the report of the Secretary General before us today provides a global snapshot of the patterns and trends of conflict-related sexual violence across 20 situations of concern. It records 2,455 UN-verified cases of CRSV committed in the course of 2022. Women and girls account for 94% of the verified cases, with 6% of reported violations being against men and boys. Children represent 32% of the verified incidents, with girls making up 97%, a vast majority of these cases. Yet, while the report conveys the severity and brutality of verified incidents, it does not purport to reflect the global scale or prevalence of this chronically underreported and historically hidden crime. We know that for every woman who comes forward, many more are silenced by social pressures, stigma, insecurity, and the paucity of services. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is once again the country presenting the highest number of cases, with 701 violations of conflict-related sexual violence verified through the rigorous methodology under the monitoring, analysis, and reporting arrangements established pursuant to Security Council Resolution 1960. In addition, UN humanitarian service providers reported more than 38,000 cases of sexual and gender-based violence in 2022 in North Kivu alone, including alarming levels of sexual exploitation of children at more than 1,000 sites in and around displacement camps. Against this backdrop, I felt compelled to visit the DRC in June to assess the situation firsthand. I was horrified by the testimonies I heard from women and girls, many of whom had been very recently raped or gang raped and were still receiving treatment. Some of them were completely disoriented and in a near catatonic state due to the severity of trauma. So many of them stressed the daily risk of sexual violence while carrying out livelihood activities around the camps, such as searching for food, collecting wood, or water. Just imagine facing the reality each day that you are likely to be raped, yet having no choice but to take that risk because your family must survive. These women and girls face the unacceptable choice between economic subsistence and sexual violence, between their livelihoods and their lives. Therefore, we cannot underestimate how food insecurity increases the risk of exposure to sexual violence, and how the nexus of conflict and hunger are linked in the complex spirals of cause and effect. Another very disturbing reality is the proliferation of brothels, or so-called maisons de tolérance, inside and around the IDP camps, operating in broad daylight and under the very noses of national authorities and humanitarian actors. Sexual exploitation, including forced prostitution as a basic means of survival, sometimes referred to as survival sex, is rampant. This is sexual violence driven by economic desperation, where women and girls are compelled to prostitute themselves for less than $1 in order to survive another day. It is inconceivable that instead of zero tolerance for sexual violence, we are seeing houses of tolerance. Excellencies, in 2022, my first field visit was to Ukraine, following the surfacing of reports of sexual violence after the full-scale invasion by the Russian Federation. I was struck not only by the occurrence of sexual violence in conflict zones, but also by the acute vulnerability of millions of women and children forced to flee the country in a matter of weeks and months of the conflict. When I visited reception centers in Poland and Moldova, I witnessed firsthand the extraordinary toll on women, children, and the elderly, including their vulnerability to unscrupulous individuals and criminal networks, for whom the rapid and unprecedented mass displacement of people is not a tragedy, but an opportunity for trafficking and sexual exploitation. This March, when I returned to Ukraine, I again met with survivors and heard their heart-wrenching accounts of brutal sexual violence reportedly perpetrated by Russian soldiers. I take this opportunity to reiterate the Secretary General's call on the Russian authorities to undertake prevention measures in line with the resolution of this Council. At the same time, I am encouraged by the commitments made by the Ukrainian government, articulated in a framework of cooperation that I signed with Deputy Prime Minister Olga Stefanishina in May 2022. Since then, my office and the UN system have been supporting the national authorities to implement a comprehensive plan of action that includes addressing cross-border dimensions of trafficking. Animating the trend lines in the report before you are the harrowing personal experiences that speak to the devastating human cost of sexual violence. In Haiti, after having witnessed the execution of their husbands, victims were raped by gang members in front of their children. Many victims were forced out of vehicles at gunpoint, robbed, and subjected to collective rape in broad daylight. In the Central African Republic, a woman was gang raped to death by members of an armed group who accused her of having a relationship with a member of the National Armed Forces. In Ethiopia, many survivors have contracted HIV due to rape and now face a lifetime of stigma and health challenges. In Iraq, among the female Yazidi survivors who returned from Daesh captivity, more than 430 remain in displacement sites, grappling with significant mental health and socioeconomic challenges. Children born of rape are still unable to obtain birth registration and identity documents, as Iraqi law requires proof of paternity. The annual report clearly demonstrates the emboldening effects of impunity. The reality is that until we effectively raise the cost and consequences for committing, commanding, or condoning sexual violence, we will never stem the tide of such violations. This year, 49 parties, most of them non-state actors, are listed for systematically committing sexual violence. Over 70% are persistent perpetrators, having appeared on the list for 5 or more years without taking any remedial or corrective action. It is critical to ensure greater coherence between the Secretary General's listing and the targeted and graduated measures being imposed by United Nations sanctions committees. If applied in a timely and consistent manner, sanctions can change the calculus of parties that operate on the assumption that rape is cost-free or even profitable in the political economy of war, in which women are trafficked, traded, and sold. The report also identifies several emerging issues which exacerbated long-standing challenges to reporting and response. For instance, inflammatory rhetoric against UN peacekeepers, including violent demonstrations, narrow the operating space for service delivery and verification of allegations. Nonetheless, nearly 70% of UN-verified cases were reported in the 8 peacekeeping and special political missions where women protection advisors were deployed. While data is not a prerequisite for response, the monitoring, analysis, and reporting arrangements convened by women protection advisors are essential to building the evidence base to scale up interventions. Globally, women human rights defenders, including those advocating on behalf of victims of sexual violence, have been targeted with attacks aimed at stemming their activism. Patterns of sexual violence continued to be used as part of the repertoire of political violence to intimidate and punish opponents and women human rights defenders. In Myanmar, Colombia, and Libya, women, girls, men, boys, and individuals of diverse sexual orientation and gender identity were subjected to sexual violence, including in detention settings. The report highlights trends in the wake of unconstitutional shifts in power, escalating militarization, and illicit arms proliferation. It looks at the complex array of battlefield actors, such as private military and security companies, which have complicated attribution and accountability. It also highlights political and security challenges which have eroded rule of law institutions, creating a risk of rule of lawlessness. Indeed, the central insight of this year's report is the need to harness the preventive power of the rule of law. The positive impact of our sustained engagement is evident in a number of countries. In Guinea, in September 2022, I attended the historic opening of the trial related to events of 28th of September 2009. This historic moment for survivors of sexual violence was the culmination of a decade of unrelenting advocacy and technical support by my team of experts to national judicial authorities. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, consistent efforts by military justice authorities, in particular, have helped to stem the tide of mass rape, although sexual violence, especially by the plethora of armed groups, persists unabated. Several emblematic cases involving notorious warlords, as well as military officers, have been prosecuted and convicted. On the legislative front, the Parliament adopted a law on protection and reparations for victims of conflict-related sexual violence and established a national reparations fund, with the personal commitment and leadership of the First Lady of the DRC being instrumental to these gains. In terms of transitional justice, some momentum was also observed in the Central African Republic with the delivery by the Special Criminal Court of its first verdict convicting a commander of an armed group for rape perpetrated by his subordinates. In Colombia, the landmark report of the Truth Commission made specific recommendations to state institutions for transformative reparations for survivors. When I visited Colombia in May, I heard from survivors how important such acknowledgement and the guarantees of non-repetition are for their healing and recovery. In terms of the way forward, the report recommends gender-responsive justice and security sector reforms, strengthening holistic and multi-sectoral services for survivors, curtailing the flow of small arms and light weapons, and political and diplomatic engagements to address sexual violence in ceasefire and peace agreements. The report also recommends providing predictable financial support to the Conflict-Related Sexual Violence Multi-Partner Trust Fund for the work of the United Nations Action Against Sexual Violence in Conflict Network and the United Nations Team of Experts on the Rule of Law and Sexual Violence in Conflict. Women protection advisors are also a linchpin of our institutional response architecture, and their deployment and reinforcement of teams should be considered at critical inflection points, including during mission transitions and drawdowns. Excellencies, distinguished members of the Security Council, we must focus political resolve and resources in a global context of unremitting violence. Indeed, since the report before you was issued, series of allegations of conflict-related sexual violence have come to light. In the Sudan, since conflict broke out in April, the UN Human Rights Office has received credible reports of violations against over 50 women and girls. In a single attack, as many as 20 women were reportedly raped. This week, I received additional information of the targeting of medical infrastructure and staff providing support to victims of sexual violence, as well as an increase in abduction of women and girls. Both the Rapid Support Services and the Sudan Armed Forces are listed by the Secretary General, and I have communicated to General Mohammed Hamdan Hemedti and General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, respectively, the measures that they are required to take by this Council. It is evident that these tragic episodes form part of the long litany of battles fought on the bodies of women and girls, from Bosnia to Rwanda, Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere. Today, we know more than ever before about what motivates sexual violence, who the perpetrators are, and the service response required by survivors. We know that these crimes do not occur in a vacuum, but are tied to broader security dynamics. Therefore, it is essential to ground prevention efforts in this enhanced knowledge, which is at the heart of the prevention strategy that my office launched in September 2022. We must ensure implementation of Council resolutions while adapting our actions to today's conflicts and emerging global challenges, including threats from the largely ungoverned digital space and climate-related insecurity. The time is now to double down on the institutional and accountability frameworks put in place by successive resolutions. We must act urgently and with sustained resolve to save succeeding generations from this scourge. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Ms. Pramila Patten for her extensive briefing, and I now invite and give the floor to Ms. Noor Hser. The floor is yours.
President, Excellencies, civil society colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to brief you at today annual open debate on conflict-related sexual violence. I'm Noor Hser, Advisory Board Member of Women's League of Burma. a civil society coalition representing women across Myanmar. It has now been over 2 years since the military launched a coup overthrowing the elected government, which has generated further conflict across Myanmar. Over 33,000 civilians have been arrested by the junta, more than 1.8 million have been displaced, and women and girls are at greater risk of sexual and gender-based violence, largely at the hands of military, but by unturned military defense force as well. Despite these many risks, women remain at the forefront of the resistance to the military, comprising over 60% of pro-democracy human rights defenders. Women's human rights defenders from across Myanmar are on the front lines, providing essential service to internally displaced persons and survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, reporting on human rights abuse, and provided shelter and safe house for protesters. We are unified by our collective call for a federal democracy in Myanmar, and we know that in order to do so, we must not only end military rule, but also challenge patriarchal oppression. Women's human rights defenders in Myanmar face enormous challenges, including threats to their safety and that of their families. For example, the military has issued arrest warrants for many of our staff. This undermines our ability to support IDP and survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. Many women's defenders are hiding or, like me, have been forced to leave Myanmar in order to continue our work. This military has long used sexual violence to attack civilian populations. Rape and sexual violence were hallmarks of the military's 2017 genocide of Rohingya, and Rohingya women and girls who fled Myanmar for Bangladesh, including transgender women, now face higher risks of violence. Since the coup, we have documented over 100 cases of conflict-related sexual violence and gender-based violence. One in case, junta soldier repeatedly raped a woman at gunpoint in front of her husband in Chin State. At the same evening, the victim's sister-in-law, who was 7 months pregnant, was also raped by junta soldier. The real numbers of cases is likely much higher, since many victims do not report sexual violence for fear of further abuse by the military. Women and LGBTQR people in detention are vulnerable to torture, including sexual violence. Thousands of women have been arrested since the coup and remained in detention, and 50 women have been sentenced to death for their pro-democracy activities. Sexual violence is a deliberate and systematic target to target women and punish them, not only for speaking out against their regime, but also for defying patriarchal norms. Many women's defenders face both online abuse and tactics that can result in offline violence, false allegations, and unlawful arrest. Women from ethnic or religious minority, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and intersex women, and women who are politically active have been targeted for such abuse. As a result of such attacks, many women feel they have no choice but to censor themselves or scale back their activism. International actors must support women's human rights defenders, protect their fundamental rights, and enable their participation, including at international level. Accountability is essential for ending all forms of violence against women in all their diversity. The 2021 coup was a result of decades of impunity for the military junta, including for its use of sexual and gender-based violence as a tactic to target the terrorist civilian populations. At present, domestic options for justice, including for conflict-related sexual violence, are impossible. I therefore urge the Security Council to refer the situation in Myanmar to the International Criminal Court for war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. As the Special Rapporteur on Myanmar recently noted, the military needs three things to sustain itself: arms, money, and international legitimacy. Women civil society know all too well that these are also the tools that use perpetrate violence against women in the country. The Security Council should impose an embargo on the sale and transfer of arms, ammunition, and aviation fuel. I also urge the international community to enact targeted sanctions against the military and its proxies, including Myanmar oil and gas enterprises. In addition, I urge you to reject any effort by the military junta to hold sham elections which cannot be free or fair, nor lay the groundwork for a democratic future. Finally, I urge you to build on the progress of Resolution 2669 to continue to demand an immediate end to all forms of violence against women, violence against in Myanmar, including sexual and gender-based violence, and to keep Myanmar on the agenda of the Security Council in open session so that civil society can participate. Currently, 1 in 3 people in Myanmar is in need of humanitarian assistance due to food insecurity and limited access to health care, including sexual and reproductive care for survivors. Local ethnic women's organizations are vital in providing humanitarian assistance to their communities, and they need your support to continue to this essential work. This is an important moment for Myanmar. For the first time, the people of Myanmar are united across ethnic, religions, and gender lines in our common struggle for ending military dictatorship, ensure justice, and calling for federal democratic Myanmar grounded in diversity and pluralism. Now we need your support. Excellencies, I would like to add my statement today with one simple point. Myanmar is an example of how political violence, including sexual violence, is used to intimidate, punish, and silence human rights defenders, journalists, and a women's leader in many other conflicts, such as Sudan, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, and Libya. I urge you today to demand an end to all forms of violence against women human rights defenders and civil society leaders, and to demonstrate by meaningful action that protection of women's rights is fundamental to peace, not only in Myanmar, but to all conflicts and crises. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Hser for her briefing, and I now give the floor to our next briefer, to Nadine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear distinguished Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to be here. As a survivor champion for the UK government, I will speak in a collective voice, highlighting the view of many survivors from different countries. I also want to take the opportunity to thank you all for understanding the need and importance of a survivor-centered approach to guide the way we respond to conflict-related sexual violence. Sexual violence is a crime against humanity. It is brutal, deliberate, and intended to punish and humiliate individuals and their communities. Many victims are suffering from physical and psychological trauma, long-term injuries, HIV infection, and some have died as a result. Because of CRSV, some women are having to deal with unwanted pregnancies, mothers bearing the burden of being excluded by their own families and community, men and boys facing reporting barriers because of the stigma related to perceived emasculation, as well as physical and psychological consequences. And often, there are no legal provisions regulating the rape of men. The impact of sexual violence is pervasive and destructive. The sheer number of people affected by sexual violence shows simply how many families and how many communities are impacted and destroyed. In South Sudan, women in Yada camp and the family were already displaced. When we spoke to them in 2019, they were already telling us how difficult it was to try find work and get food because getting out of the camp was too dangerous. They were watching the children die from starvation because leaving the camp was not an option. Many survivors are very grateful for the global conversation and attention on this issue, for the effort in reinforcing legal frameworks and mechanisms to prevent and respond. However, we are facing the challenges of translating the collective effort from a global level to a national level so that people affected directly can have a better life. Many survivors want to see the state take tangible steps that will increase compliance with international legal frameworks and translate their obligation into a national legislation. Having said that, for the state to strengthen the rule of law in preventing and responding to conflict-related sexual violence, we think that first it needs to demonstrate clear action plan and effective action, demonstrate the commitment to uphold their obligation towards the citizen in preventing, stopping, and responding appropriately to CRSV. People need to see the state taking charge of preventing and responding to feel safe and to be able to enjoy the basic human right. Although not all perpetrators are men in uniform, the state should work very hard to restore good standard for the servicemen because most of us want to see them doing what they're designed to do, protecting the people, protecting all of us. And citizens should not be afraid when they meet men in uniform. The repetition of sexual violence keeps people living in fear, vulnerable to further attacks. And when you live in a country where there is no rule of law and where those who are perpetrating the crime get away with impunity, you worry and don't know when you may have an accountable group that perpetrates such crime, and you cannot feel safe. So many survivors have asked me to tell you this. States need to have an organized national conversation about the role of the people in uniform and hold accountable perpetrators from other groups too. The uniform does not give people license to commit crimes. It should be worn by service people who understand the duty to represent the state and protect its people. State must reinforce the recruitment processes and take due diligence measures before allowing people to join forces. And those who work in the forces must receive mandatory training, first on how to protect and engage with survivors, how to conduct and comply with the national and international laws. State must take the courage when having the national conversation about the law and the culture norms and custom, because we cannot undermine basic human rights in the name of religion, of culture. It is the role of the state to ensure the national law addresses issue objectively, putting culture view aside. Currently, many civil society and survival-led organizations have been at the forefront of leading on raising awareness about sexual violence. But we need the state to support and promote such work awareness. And states should be more present and not absent, and be at the forefront of taking the responsibility to raise awareness about CRSV. The state should support and see the benefit of inclusive process, bringing everybody on board in understanding that tackling the issue of CRSV is a national concern and the biggest attack on humanity. States should promote laws that condemn stigma in all its forms and treat survival with dignity and care. And when this has become a national conversation, we ask that states should work with international partners to identify how the international frameworks can complement the national effort. Having said that, the state should also break all the myth rhetorics, such as why servicemen or women perpetrate conflict-related sexual violence, and some of them include being under the influence of drugs, being away from their wives for a long time, complying with peer pressure during war, and sometimes people say they're sometimes not in control of what happened. And the most insane myth is to blame victims for contributing to the attack because of the way they dressed up and all those sort of things. We want to see states adopting gender-responsive approaches when engaging with survivors. Treat people with dignity and be sensitive to their gender and their sexuality. We ask that first responders understand survivor vulnerability and to not undermine the impact of sexual violence on survivors because they are older or because of the sexual orientation. An LGBT survivor told us once, contradicting myths and misconception he faced repeatedly, that just because I'm a gay man, it does not mean that I enjoy the act. State actors must approach all survivors with the same compassion and care regardless of their gender, ethnicity, and age or sexual orientation. The state should not allow any excuse for someone to violate another person's private space and force them into a degrading treatment. States need to ensure that the recruitment criteria are reviewed, that the process and the armed forces are professional, serve with discipline, accountability, transparency, and clear expectation of professionalism and protection for all civilians. We must not allow the rhetoric that the army is for bad boys or ex-criminals or people who have nothing else to do with their lives. And if the state can strengthen the criteria of who can join the forces by incorporating thorough background checks, this will at least help recruit the right people and reinstate faith in the state to do the right thing for the people. Once we have ensured that we have the right people, we need to ensure that they are constantly trained and have training refreshed to upgrade with the current norms about their roles, duty to protect, and to reinforce good practices. We ask the state to incorporate a whistleblower practice so that servicemen who witness colleagues doing the wrong thing can safely report colleagues who misbehave. Over 90 to 95% of survivors never report what has happened to them to the police. And there are many reasons for that, including that they have no faith or trust in the justice system or how it will treat them. Conviction rates for those crimes which are reported are shockingly low. That's also caused survivors not to report. Why report if so? Few cases ever succeeded. We should understand that this fact alone can hinder the delivery and access to justice for many survivors to come forward. All our justice systems have a lot to learn and a lot to do on how to deliver justice in a survivor-centered way effectively. We should learn from jurisdictions that are trying to do safe and effective accountability work. I was in Colombia 3 weeks ago and was very inspired to see the country having a national conversation and addressing the challenges with survivors. The opening of micro cases and announcement of a special jurisdiction are all state efforts to respond and prevent. However, many survivors were still very reluctant to come forward, and mainly by fear of safety. So we should also recognize that some states need help to hold perpetrators accountable, and the international commitment can intervene earlier by working with states that are making the effort but still struggling. We can support countries for training of staff, ensuring people understand the international framework, and upgrading national laws to meet international standards. We can help them tackle the obstacle to justice and share lessons learned from other courts and countries. The international community should support states that are dealing with aggressors and perpetrators that are more powerful, and should stop the double standard by quickly condemning some perpetrators and keeping a blind eye on others. All survivors of conflict-related sexual violence suffer greatly, and we should not only quickly respond to some because of their geographical positioning and watch others dying slowly and unnoticed. The international community must condemn all perpetrators and impose sanctions on all of them. And just to give you an example, the response in Ukraine was very good, but there are many other survivors in other countries too, such as Iran, Sudan, Guatemala, the DRC, and many more. They can help create or support additional avenues for accountability for international crime, such as expanding the ICC jurisdiction, creating tribunal or adjudication mechanisms to fill the gap and facilitate the use of universal jurisdiction in other countries. The international response must be consistent. There cannot be avenue for accountability for intervention for international crime in some states and a total absence of response and accountability for crime in other states. However, we must engage with survivors in effort to close the gap between normative framework and reality on the ground. Survivor participation is key in the effort of raising awareness about conflict-related sexual violence, its impact, and how we can strengthen justice pathway in a survivor-centered manner. When becoming a survivor champion, Kobasia and I knew and understood that our role was not about us two, only representing all survivors, but rather figure out how to make a space and create a platform through which more survivors can participate in the work of Preventive Sexual Violence Initiative. I'm very grateful that the UK government understands that and has been very supportive. We were very honored to work with so many other survivors from different countries in the planning of the conference in London. And during the survivor retreat at Wheaton Park this year, together, we sought to establish what proper engagement means. I'm very grateful that we now have a global survivor advisory group that is committed to guide how we prevent and respond and promote survivor-centered approach with survivor in regard to CRSV. And I hope that next time, another survivor from the group will be invited to speak to you, and we ask for more countries to follow suit, to promote champions and survivor leadership. We can learn from other countries' good practices in the way they engage with survivors, such as Kosovo and Colombia. Kobasia and I have had the opportunity to meet many more survivors from different countries, and we have been very inspired to see the determination and resilience. They tell us about their own challenges in surviving journeys, as well as the risks they take in doing what they do. And despite the challenges, the survivors who are leading the work on the ground are facing a lot of problems in terms of their own safety, stigma, and the effort to bring the whole community to understand the value of their own work. They are doing so much with little support from states and the international community. However, many of them experience a lot of financial difficulties because of lack of funding. They cannot compete with big names who easily meet the criteria for funding, and yet they are still doing tremendous work, including inspiring adult survival about resilience and hope for the future. I'd like to take this opportunity to ask that we have an allocated fund to support survival-led work only. And before I finish, I'd also like to take this opportunity to say that although I now live in the UK and have been able to rebuild my life, what is happening in DRC is very sad, because this is the country I am from originally. And I'd like to ask the DRC government to be more present and not absent in what is going on in our country. You have the responsibility to start this national conversation and raise awareness locally about what is going on. I ask that you support survival and condemn stigma in all its forms. Our people are suffering too much, and the war has been long. And the DRC has become a dangerous place to live in as a woman, let alone a little girl. The aggressor are getting away with what they are doing, and they seem to have strong allies and international support. I take the opportunity to ask the international community to condemn them and hold them accountable, and to stop the double standard, but also responding quickly and effectively to what is happening in the DRC. Thank you for listening.
I thank Nadine for her briefing and insights. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as Minister of State of the United Kingdom. Firstly, may I begin by thanking you, Special Representative Pramila Patten, for your ongoing work in this area. You have led this agenda with conviction, with courage and principle. I have had the honor to work with you directly, and we continue to recognize the important work of the United Nations in this respect. Thank you also to our incredible briefers. Thank you to Ms. Noor, Hser, and Nadine, to you for your briefing today. And if I may, Your Excellencies, just to put into context, when we hear from survivors at the UN Security Council, and I want you to think about this very, very carefully, they have been through the most abhorrent violation of their person, unimaginable in every sense. Not only have they survived that particular violation of their person, their private space, as Nadine rightly said, they have survived. They are not just victims, they are survivors in the truest sense. And when we hear from survivors, be it at the UN Security Council or anywhere across the world, imagine the strength and courage and conviction of those survivors, that not only have they survived, they become the most powerful of advocates on this most important agenda that we have in front of us today. So I thank again through Nadine and through Noor to all those courageous survivors who are doing incredible work around the world. Thank you to them. Thank you to you both for doing so much to bring global attention to the horrors of conflict-related sexual violence and to the importance and the central and pivotal responsibility of us all for supporting survivors. Your Excellencies, sexual violence must never, never be accepted as an inevitable consequence of war. It is we, the Security Council of the United Nations, which has a special responsibility in this respect. As we reflect over the past years, over the last 15 years, it is this Council which has built a robust framework for preventing sexual violence, supporting survivors, and importantly, to bring perpetrators to justice. And while we may note these achievements, across the world, as we've heard directly today again from the SRSG, from our expert briefers, there remains a gap between what this Council has rightly mandated and the reality which is faced by thousands of people across conflict zones, boys, girls, women, and men. And this violence continues. Survivors, as we heard from Nadine, often suffer in silence, and perpetrators tragically go unpunished. We need to be the council for action, not just for talk. We have the responsibility collectively to bridge that gap. This does mean that every one of our states putting the Council's resolutions, which have been passed, into actual living practice, ensuring that important and pivotal access to justice, and importantly, providing survivors with the critical services they need to importantly rebuild their lives. It means states and UN bodies incorporating that important gender perspective into our peacekeeping operations, as we've heard from our survivors directly. When someone sees a person in uniform, be it through the state or indeed through the UN, that should bring hope. That should bring an addressing of their fear. That should bring security and safety. Therefore, we all need to step up and do more. It means that this council, this Security Council, using sanctions against those perpetrators. And crucially, it means that those who engage in armed conflict, stopping acts of sexual violence with immediate effect. For our part, the United Kingdom is determined that the lack of understanding, indeed ignorance, should never be a barrier to action. In this regard, to help close the implementation gap, we have worked with the Mukwege Foundation, and I pay tribute to the incredible and courageous Dr. Dennis Mukwege, who many of us know, to launch a new guidebook on state obligations for conflict-related sexual violence. I'm pleased we've provided council members with a copy of this, and I do ask that we encourage all of us as governments, as civil society, as activists, as civil society organizations, as advocates, to come together to make the most of this excellent new tool. For more than a decade, supporting survivors and international cooperation have been the central tenets of the United Kingdom's Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict initiative. And the prevention element is key. Our landmark international conference in November last year in London that Nadine referred to brought together over 1,000 delegates. And most importantly, it brought together survivors. We've just heard from Nadine as follow-up events of this global coalition of survivors which has now been formed. And this is needed. Why? Because we need to accelerate progress towards our goals. And since then, we have now, as the United Kingdom government, sanctioned 13 perpetrators of sexual violence since that conference. But, as we heard from Nadine, it also requires financing. Our 3-year strategy is also backed up with up to £12.5 million of funding. And importantly, it's providing direct support to survivors. And also importantly, helping countries to strengthen justice and accountability. Domestic, local justice, the evidence is there, Your Excellencies, is best served when it's done nationally, and we need to stand up and ensure that we can support such efforts. We also continue to lead international efforts to support children born of conflict-related sexual violence. And I ask again the question, it's self-reflection on all of us. What is the crime of that child born of this crime? The short answer is nothing. And we should be showing compassion and care and support to such children born of such abhorrent acts. And today we published the commitments of the UK and our partners to support this group under our platform for action. In addition to our new international alliance, which we launched recently, vice-chaired by Colombia and Ukraine, I'm delighted to report that this has now grown to 21 members. I'm truly delighted that Spain has joined this alliance in June. And, of course, France has also recently become a very valued and important member. All members of this alliance committed to amplifying survivors' voices, sharing our collective expertise, and importantly, pioneering new approaches. Today, members of that alliance, this very day of our meeting, have issued a joint statement shining a light on the appalling reports of sexual violence in Sudan, referred to by the SRSG in her briefing. We have called for all parties to the conflict to end violence, including sexual violence, and for safe humanitarian access to all those in need. And I want to, on behalf of the United Kingdom, thank, as the current chair, all alliance members of standing with us on this important issue. But as we've heard already, it is survivors that are key in every sense. Survivors such as those led by our survivor champions, Nadine and Colabasia. And I can tell you, Your Excellencies, from personal experience, as the UK's Prime Minister's special representative on preventing sexual violence in conflict, that working with such groups, such incredible, courageous champions over the last 6 years has been truly inspiring and humbling. They guide our entire approach. And as we've seen today, I'm truly grateful to Nadine for her contribution today. I've had the honor of leading this agenda, but also, like others, going into field visits across the world, the DRC, the Balkans, Bangladesh, and elsewhere. And just to share with you how abhorrent these crimes are, when I visited the DRC last November with Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Edinburgh, we went to that incredible hospital run by Dr. Mukwege, the Pansy Hospital. And Your Excellencies, forget for a moment the country, forget who is speaking, who did the visit, but just visualize for a moment that the youngest victim, survivor of sexual violence we met, was 4 years old, a young girl who had been raped not once, but a number of times. And to her, a man meant rape. That is the reality we face around the world. And therefore, I cannot underline the importance of our debate today. And I thank my own team here in New York for putting together the agenda for this meeting. I thank the UK's Survivor Advisory Group. And they've asked me quite specifically to underline some key issues to the Council today, which I'm honoured to do so. Firstly, the importance of a survivor-centred approach in all our work, engaging with a wide range of survivors in the decisions. Why? Because it affects them. Second, the vital role of psychosocial support in survivors overcoming trauma. Some of these, indeed all of them, are broken emotionally, physically, and therefore we need to ensure that that first step of helping them rebuild their lives is provided through allowing them to overcome trauma. And finally, the survivors groups have asked me to underline the importance of ensuring access to justice and addressing wider sexual violence concerns during both war and, importantly, peace. On the topic of justice, we are working on the Draft Crimes Against Humanity Convention so it delivers more effectively for survivors. We are also partnering with the International Criminal Court prosecutor to overcome barriers to justice, including through a new virtual reality tool to help survivors engage directly with the courts. This incredible technology creates a virtual court to help witnesses and survivors give informed consent to take part in trials and help them prepare for giving evidence. It's putting survivors first. Your Excellencies, friends, colleagues, to all who are attending, and I hope many who will follow this debate, sexual violence in conflict is not inevitable. It's reprehensible. It's abhorrent. And it is our responsibility to act. And you know what? Together we can. Indeed, we must. And what's more, we will. So together we can consign sexual violence in conflict to the history books. And with the help of the courageous survivors at the heart of our work, God willing, inshallah, I hope we will achieve that objective. Thank you. I now resume my function as President of the Council, and I have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Simon Gespula, State Secretary and Head of Peace and Human Rights Division, the Federal Department of the Foreign Affairs of Switzerland. Your Excellency.
Monsieur le Président.
President, I'd like to thank the United Kingdom for organising this debate and the briefers for their contributions and for their shocking testimonies. We need more than moral indignation. We need action. These are the words of Nadia Murad, who briefed this council in April 2022. 15 years after the adoption of Resolution 1820, sexual and gender-based violence in conflict persists, as does impunity. In Myanmar, the DRC, Haiti, Sudan, South Sudan, and in the context of Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, state and non-state actors continue to use rape, sexual violence, sexual exploitation, abuse, and trafficking as tactics and tools of war, torture, and terrorism. We must fully and sustainably implement the requirements this Council set itself in Resolution 1820. I'd like to highlight 3 points for action in this respect. Firstly, we must invest more in the deployment of expertise and capacities in UN missions. To enable them to fulfill their mandates, women protection advisors must be mobilized and provided with sufficient resources. Capacities and expertise in the prevention, protection, monitoring, and prosecution of sexual and gender-based violence must be strengthened. They must be strengthened within troop and police contributing countries, within sanctions expert groups, and within national institutions. Secondly, there is a close link between illicit arms proliferation and sexual violence, which we must take into account to better prevent these crimes. The illicit proliferation of small arms and light weapons increases the risk of conflict-related sexual violence. In our prevention efforts, we need to systematically use arms control and disarmament tools in a gender-sensitive way. This also applies to sanctions regimes. Finally, we must promote the participation of women in forums aimed at reducing arms proliferation. This is why Switzerland supports the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research in its respective studies on the link with the gender dimension. Thirdly, all survivors must be able to have fair and unimpeded access to justice. Victims of conflict-related sexual violence are entitled to an effective remedy and reparation under international law. To this end, Switzerland supports the work of the Global Survivors Fund, which works to develop survivor-centered reparations programs. The documentation of crimes is crucial to their prosecution. Defending the right to truth, Switzerland is committed, for instance in Ukraine, Kosovo, Iraq, and the DRC, to ensuring that survivors have access to justice and reparations. Mr. President, Without protection against and prevention of sexual violence, there can be no equal participation. And as we well know, the full inclusion of women is a sine qua non for lasting peace. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Geisbühler for his statement on behalf of Switzerland, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, first of all, I welcome you to New York as you preside over today's open debate. I wish to thank Special Representative Patten for her briefing earlier. Sexual violence is a heinous violation of human rights. 15 years after the adoption of Security Council Resolution 1820 on sexual violence in conflict, sexual violence is still widely used as a tactic in wars and terrorism, causing immense harm to women and girls in many countries and regions. China firmly opposes the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war and strongly condemns all acts of sexual violence against women and girls. We call upon the international community to make joint efforts and take comprehensive measures to eliminate sexual violence in conflict as soon as possible and promote new progress in women, peace, and security. I will address 3 points. First, we need to strengthen conflict prevention and resolution. Our world is witnessing an increasing number of violent conflicts, with nearly 1/4 of the global population living in conflict-affected areas. Vulnerable groups such as women and children face particularly severe security threats and risks of sexual violence, displacement, and human trafficking. Sexual violence in conflict cannot be eliminated in isolation. Only through ceasefires, ending hostilities, and restoring peace can women and children be fundamentally free from harm and their basic rights be protected. To achieve peace, we must adhere to political settlement to disputes and increase efforts in negotiations, mediation, and facilitation. We must practice genuine multilateralism and translate the purposes and principles of the UN Charter into action. We should also focus on addressing root causes and invest more in achieving common security. As the Council bears the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, it must actively fulfill this role and demonstrate its commitment. Second, strong countermeasures must be taken. Security Council resolutions explicitly prohibit sexual violence as a means of war, but this red line of international law has been repeatedly breached. If we cannot effectively punish the crimes that have already been committed, it will be difficult to deter and prevent new violations. The international community must strengthen the rule of law and implement the requirements for combating sexual violence in conflict, so that perpetrators can be held accountable and justice can be served for the victims. The countries concerned bear the primary responsibility for the prevention and elimination of sexual violence and the protection of women and children. The international community, on the basis of respect for their sovereignty and leadership, should support them in strengthening security sector capacity building to effectively combat terrorist and violent extremist forces, in strengthening the rule of law and improving the legal and regulatory system for the protection of their rights and interests, and strengthening humanitarian efforts and helping victims of sexual violence to obtain remedy and reparation. Third, we must support the empowerment and the development of women. In conflict situations, sexual violence is often intertwined with issues of discrimination and poverty, further worsening the plight and the suffering of women. In addition to a peace-focused approach, the international community should also address this issue from the perspective of women's empowerment and sustainable development. Efforts should be made to eliminate gender discrimination and differentiated treatments, as well as to address the livelihood challenges and development gaps faced by women. Digital and information technologies are important means of empowering women and critical tools for early warning of conflicts, victim assistance and investigation, and accountability. However, the lack of reliable, accessible, and affordable digital infrastructure is a common challenge faced by women in conflict-affected areas. We welcome the focus of this year's International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict on the technology and digital divide. We support Special Representative Patten's call to bridge the gender digital divide and advocate for the use of digital technology to enhance the protection of women, amplify the active role, participation, and transformative power of women in peace and security. Mr. President, the issue of women and armed conflict is one of the 12 priorities identified in the Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action. As the host country of the 4th World Conference on Women, China has always been an advocate for gender equality, a protector of women's rights, and a practitioner of women empowerment. China has deployed a large number of female peacekeepers to UN PKOs, bringing hope to people in conflict areas, especially women and girls. China is committed to helping other countries in promoting women's development and provided training to over 130,000 women professionals in developing countries. China, in collaboration with UNESCO, has established awards for girls and women's education, helping more women change their destinies through knowledge and skills. China will continue to work with the international community to make active efforts and greater contributions to the advancement of women globally. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I now pass the floor to the representative of the United States. Ambassador, Your Excellency.
Good. Thank you, Lord Ahmad, and I thank your countries. I thank your country's leadership on preventing conflict-related sexual violence and providing this incredible opportunity for us today, and in particular for you sharing your experiences in dealing with this issue. I also want to thank today's civil society briefers for their powerful messages, and Special Representative Patten for her compelling remarks. From signing frameworks of cooperation to leading the UN Action Network for Prevention and Response Coordination, the Special Representative and her team have made a real difference. We proudly support the SRSG's mandate, including through financial support, which last year was over $2 million, and we encourage other member states to back this important work. Finally, let me add our strong support for her participation in this meeting and object to the personal attacks against her for amplifying the voices of women by the Russian Federation. Colleagues, the United States is deeply committed to preventing and responding to conflict-related sexual violence and all other forms of gender-based violence. We know that in conflicts around the world, sexual violence is often used as a weapon of war. In Ukraine, contrary to Russian objections and insinuations, there is ample evidence and horrific reports of Russian soldiers deploying sexual violence against men, women, children, with victims ranging from ages 4 to over 80. In Sudan, girls on the way to school are sexually assaulted by the military, rapid support forces, and armed nomads. In Myanmar, the bodies of women extrajudicially executed by the military have injuries consistent with sexual violence. And the Secretary General's report highlights a shocking number of sexual crimes committed by criminal and illegal armed groups in a host of other countries, including in Haiti, as we heard earlier today. The international community must do more to address this profound crisis. We owe it to the courageous survivors who have come forward and those who have been silenced by fear to take swift and meaningful action. First, we must recognize that gender-based violence is fundamentally rooted in gender inequality. We must take on harmful gender norms, and we must empower women and girls in all their diversity. The United Nations and member states must apply conflict-sensitive and participatory gender analysis to ensure our interventions address underlying inequities. These inequities, when combined with weak or absent state institutions, can lead to widespread gender-based violence. So it's on us. It's on us to continue to promote the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in decision-making roles at all levels of conflict prevention, resolution, and peace building. Second, we must adopt a survivor-centered and trauma-informed approach. This means providing survivors with access to medical care, particularly clinical management of rape, psychosocial support, reproductive health services, and legal support. This also means listening to those who've experienced sexual violence in conflict and responding to their unique needs, which will help facilitate their recovery and legal remedies. And this means creating supportive environments, environments where survivors' rights are respected, re-traumatization is avoided, and survivors have the resources they need to thrive. Finally, we cannot turn a blind eye to these atrocities. There must be accountability. Nadine, we heard you. Hser, we heard you. We must use our diplomatic tools to reduce impunity for perpetrators and deter future acts of violence. The United States is committed to exercising existing authorities to impose economic sanctions and implement visa restrictions. I would also like to highlight the Secretary General's recommendation that the Security Council systematically monitor conflict-related sexual violence and include this as a standalone criteria for targeted sanctions. We must all increase accountability within conflict-affected regions, and we can do so by strengthening documentation efforts, passing relevant national legislation, and changing institutional culture. Colleagues, this Council has spent a great deal of time discussing these issues, but we cannot discuss away the crisis. It's time for us to act. The most vulnerable are counting on us, those trapped in conflict zones who want nothing more than the chance to live in peace, who yearn for justice. We must commit to action, and we must do so with urgency. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I thank the representative, the Ambassador of the United States. In doing so, I now pass the floor and invite the representative of Ghana.
Mr. President, Lord Ahmad, I recall the able manner you chaired last year's open debate on conflict-related sexual violence, especially the interest and fervor you brought to the discussion, as well as your own long-standing contribution towards ending conflict-related sexual violence. Today has been no different, and Ghana thanks the UK for convening this important open debate. I also express appreciation to SRSG Pramila Patten for her briefing, as well as the unique perspectives of Hser and Nadine. We salute the courage of our briefers and their strong advocacy on the subject, as well as the attention they draw to the need for following through with global commitments. Mr. President, as is well known, in times of armed conflict, the fabric that holds communities together unravels. Families are torn apart, civilian objects are crushed, people are displaced, and impunity replaces law, order, and accountability. The breakdown of law and order in such situations is usually accompanied by extreme poverty, hunger, and diseases. When sexual violence is introduced into this toxic mix, the human suffering is immense, with deep-seated and long-lasting emotional and physical consequences for affected persons and communities. To borrow the words of Heinrich Böll, the German writer and Nobel Prize winner, quote, "War will never be over, never, as long as somewhere a wound it had inflicted is still bleeding, unquote. Ghana strongly condemns the unending cycle of sexual violence across several conflict contexts, whether it is the subjugation of women and girls in Afghanistan by the Taliban, or the use of rape as a tool by armed gangs against members of rival communities in Haiti. The impunity with which sexual violence is perpetrated is extremely alarming and not geographically isolated. We also note with great concern, as the Secretary General's 2022 report indicates, that the growing prevalence of arms proliferation, increasing militarization, and shrinking civic space have exacerbated sexual violence and challenged safe reporting and response. This Council and the global community therefore have a continuing responsibility to ensure that the existing resolutions which champion prevention, accountability, and justice are translated into tangible actions that can be felt on the ground. Mr. President, in making specific recommendations for today's debate, Ghana would like to focus on 3 issues. First, we reaffirm support for the Security Council's practice to treat conflict-related sexual violence as the basis for targeted sanctions against culpable actors. Periodic briefings to sanction committees by the Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict will be useful in sustaining the interest on the progress of implementation of such sanctions. Tied to the global efforts, domestic legislation in support of investigations and penalties against perpetrators of sexual violence in conflict settings would be necessary to right the wrongs done to victims. Secondly, while Ghana commends the progress made in the deployment of women's protection advisors as part of peacekeeping and special political missions to monitor, analyze, and report on conflict-related sexual violence, we urge the timely provision of adequate resources for such purposes so as to facilitate frequent, reliable, and accurate reporting from the field, to enable the Council to take needful action when it can be most effective in preventing or stopping such atrocities. Lastly, to empower survivors, the United Nations and member states, including national civil society groups, should be intentional in the recruitment of survivors to be part of decision-making processes and advocacy mechanisms on sexual violence. This form of empowerment, we believe, meaningfully impacts policy and legal processes and implementation, and helps survivors to reestablish a sense of control and agency, as well as to recognize their own strengths and capabilities in resolving this challenge. In concluding, Mr. President, 15 years since the Council's unanimous adoption of Resolution 1820 of 2008, our collective responsibility to eliminate conflict-related sexual violence and end impunity for such crimes is needed now more than ever. On our part, Ghana would continue to demonstrate commitment to the WPS agenda through our national efforts, but also in our regional and international mobilization endeavors. In this regard, women in peacekeeping is one of the priority themes that we have chosen to be discussed during the peacekeeping ministerial meeting scheduled to take place in Ghana from the 5th to 6th of December. We commend Bangladesh for co-hosting in Dhaka with Canada and Uruguay a preparatory meeting on the theme. We look forward to welcoming all supporters of peacekeeping in Accra to establish practical measures to advance the potential of women in the arena of peace and security. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ghana for their statement, Your Excellency. Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're delighted to see you in the President's chair at the Security Council. The Russian Federation condemns sexual violence in all its forms, just like all other crimes committed in conflicts and in post-conflict settings as well. Such deeds should be investigated. The perpetrators should be held accountable. Such law enforcement activities falls within the purview of states. Measures taken by UN system entities and civil society complement the aforementioned efforts. This work should be systematic, it should be comprehensive, with due regard for the causes and sources of this negative phenomenon. It should bring long-term and lasting results. All of the above is only possible when information which the United Nations draws on has been verified and is objective. It's absolutely unacceptable when the suffering of people who have been subjected to sexual violence or accusations that such serious crimes have been committed are used as pawns in political games or become part of mudslinging rhetoric, which is often not based on fact. It's also necessary to note that there is a robust legal basis for international cooperation on preventing sexual violence in conflict. That is the Geneva Conventions on the Protection of War Victims, 1949, as well as the additional protocols thereto. However, we are compelled to recognize that not all states, far from all states, are parties to these additional protocols, and even those who are calling for combating war crimes here in the Council, some of them aren't parties either. The Security Council, addressing this issue as part of its efforts to uphold international peace and security, made its contribution by adopting a number of thematic resolutions. Responsibility for such crimes are set forth in states' national legislation. On this note, it's unclear to us why the report refers to customary international law norms of some sort when prosecuting sexual violence. It's also unclear a term that is being used that's not legal, nor has it been endorsed by the Security Council, that is conflict-related sexual violence, CRSV. We also have some questions about assertions that we should be devising indicators of sexual violence occurring and being provoked. We would recommend that instead of engaging in such speculative exercises, that we pay greater attention to specific situations stressing enforcement. The cornerstone should be efforts to assist states in prosecuting perpetrators who, as a general rule, are non-state entities. A key component of the UN's work on this front is assisting victims. Assessments and conclusions of the report on specific countries raise even more questions. On what basis were allegations leveled at Syria, stating that sexual violence is being used in Syria to suppress dissent? It's worth noting that in the reports there's no assessment given to what's going on in Idlib and the Trans-Euphrates. Why the selective approach? We welcome the mention made of the dramatic situation in the Al-Hol camp, where we're seeing rampant violence, prostitution, sexual exploitation of minors, as well as human trafficking. However, we can't see any information in the report about the fact that all of this is happening on territory under US control and the control of their allies. The section on Myanmar is also one-sided. The list of perpetrators is made up solely of members of the armed forces, whereas crimes being committed by terrorists and militants are ignored. This doesn't help the report's credibility credentials. The section on Ka and Mali can be seen as an attempt to shift stress from the objective fact that sexual violence tactics are being used by terrorists. We also have some questions about the portrayal of the situation in Afghanistan. On the one hand, there's an attempt to give a general assessment of the human rights situation in the country, including the issue of the restrictions on women's rights. On the other hand, there's nothing about how the rights of women, as well as other Afghanistanis, are being impacted by the US seizing financial means which could have been used to improve the awful socioeconomic situation in Afghanistan. In these reports, there is also no mention made about the US armed forces or the coalition, which spent many years on the territory of this country, and this despite the fact that human rights defenders published countless accounts of the US military being at least complicit in sexual exploitation of boys. Mr. President, if there were any doubts left about whether the report is biased or not, well, the section on Ukraine definitively dispels these. The allegations contained therein targeting Russian servicemen are groundless and absurd. They're nothing but a dissemination of fakes made up in Kiev. Representatives of the Kiev regime are acting in keeping with the maxims of their Third Reich idols. And one of those idols stated that the bigger the lie, the easier it is to believe it. However, the UN Secretariat should not really be participating in such information campaigns. Any accusations against states or parties to a conflict in the report should be reliable. They should be based on corroborated facts and drawn from sources which are verifiable. And yet the SRSG prefers to level groundless accusations at states' armed forces without leaving any chance for these to be verified. Before the report was published, the Russian Federation officially submitted a request to the Secretary General and the SRSG asking for information that would allow us to verify what was said. These requests were simply ignored. On this note, we'd like to underscore once again that we fully repudiate the insinuations contained in the report. The actions of Russian servicemen in combat environments and outside such environments are subject to sole command, stringent rules and regulations. Any unlawful acts are investigated without delay and the perpetrators are brought to justice. We'd like to remind you that the OHCHR monitoring mission in Ukraine, as well as other international entities, have published reports regarding numerous crimes committed by Ukrainian fighters, beatings, tortures using electric shock, threats, and rape of those suspected of cooperating with the authorities of Donetsk and Lugansk. However, this information was not duly assessed in the reports regarding sexual violence and conflict. After the liberation of the DPR and the LPR, the Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation had an opportunity to conduct large-scale investigations of the crimes committed by Ukrainian nationalists and Ukrainian servicemen who were present on that territory, the territory of the two republics, from 2014 onwards. Russian investigators determined and recorded testimony from civilians which were subjected to abuse on the part of neo-Nazis and nationalists. A woman from the DPR related that after she was taken on the night of the 18th of January 2015, she was taken to a basement by the Ukrainian security service. This was in Kramatorsk. There she was beaten, raped, and otherwise abused. Security service personnel threatened to do the same with her underage daughter. A woman from Mariupol explained how militants from the Azov battalion, and you saw footage of Zelensky recently hugging Azov commanders for the cameras, well, Azov battalion members raped women who expressed sympathy for Russia, and they poured expanding foam into their genitals. Neo-Nazis from the Tornado Battalion, and this occurred between the 17th and the 23rd of March 2015, set up a torture chamber in the basement of a Lysychansk school where they tortured and raped local women, including senior citizens and minors. These are just a few of the real crimes being committed by Ukrainian neo-nationalists and the Ukrainian armed forces, crimes which were never investigated by the Kiev regime, crimes which representatives of the UN never paid any attention to, and in fact no one was held responsible for these acts. However, the Russian Federation will see the relevant criminal prosecutions through, and those who are guilty will be held accountable as they deserve to be. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Monsieur le Président.
President, we would like to express our gratitude to the United Kingdom for this initiative, organising this open debate, which is part and parcel of our collective endeavour to fully implement resolutions on this important issue, conflict-related sexual violence, CRSV. Against a global backdrop of a multitude of crises, today's theme gives us an opportunity to reflect on the fate of civilian populations, specifically women and children, who are being the hardest hit by these fragile situations in conflict and post-conflict situations. I'd like to express my gratitude to the SRSG, Ms. Patten, as well as to the civil society representatives, Ms. Noor and Nadine, in the chamber with us. They managed to give fresh impetus to this debate in a remarkable fashion. President, the adoption of Resolution 1820 on the 19th of June 2008, as well as of Resolution 1888 in 2009, establishing the Office of the SRSG on CRSV, amplified the echo of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, specifically as regards the need to put an end to sexual violence in armed conflict settings. These resolutions marked a turning point in the way we perceive sexual violence as a security issue in its own right. The last report on this topic recalls in a very alarming fashion that sexual violence continues to be used as a tactic of war, of torture and terrorism against the backdrop of political crises and security crises, which are being aggravated by militarization and the illicit proliferation of arms. This astounding situation compels us, the international community, and specifically members of the UN Security Council, to mobilize our efforts so as to put an end to CRSV cycles, specifically by stressing the preventive capacity stemming from the promotion of the rule of law and by investing more in 3 key areas: prevention, accountability, and institutional reform. Mr. President, Gabon continues to place women's well-being and the well-being of young people squarely at the center of its development policy. Gabon recognizes the boundless potential of women when it comes to security, stability, and lasting peace. We've been unswerving in our commitment on and our advocacy for accountability for the perpetrators of sexual violence, conflict-related sexual violence on the one hand, and on the other hand, we've also been committed to strengthening the resilience of women who are often the first victims in such settings. Effective participation of women in prevention, conflict resolution, post-conflict recovery, and peace building helps not just to build a more lasting peace, but also to make transitional justice decisions fairer and better tailored to the damage the victims have suffered as well as to their expectations. We welcome the recent conviction of the perpetrators of atrocities in the east of the DRC. Justice was served, helping 300 Congolese women who were victims of sexual violence. In a similar fashion, we'd like to commend the tireless efforts of local organizations such as SFVS, Women's Synergy for Victims of Sexual Violence, and other organizations who are working for equitable justice, providing legal assistance to women who have fallen victim to sexual violence in North Kivu. By facilitating access to justice and accountability mechanisms for survivors, local civil society is playing a pivotal role in the reparations process, a key component that's necessary for us to restore their dignity to victims. We need a comprehensive approach that adapts to various situations, stressing building institutional capacity, security sector reform, as well as awareness raising amongst the public at large. Mr. President, my country calls for further efforts to ensure ownership and comprehensive and inclusive implementation of Resolution 1325, as well as concomitant resolutions, especially the pivotal resolutions 1820 of 2008 and 2467 of 2019. Also, we'd like to recall Resolution 1983 of 2011, which was shepherded by Gabon in 2011 as a sign that we are staunchly committed to this important issue. The resolution underscores inter alia the importance to undertake systematic efforts to stamp out CRSV as well as gender-based violence. My country would like to call for an enhanced partnership between the UN and regional organizations, especially as regards coordinating the Women, Peace and Security agenda, not just to come up with tailored, lasting solutions to conflicts, but also to root out their causes, as well as to further incorporate the gender dimension in UN peacekeeping operation mandates. On this note, we welcome the growing deployment of female peacekeepers in African Union operations, for example, in Somalia. Moreover, Gabon would like to welcome the establishment of organizations such as FemWise by the African Union, as well as the African Women's Leaders Network. These are effective instruments that can further the involvement of women in political processes. These African Union initiatives deserve praise and encouragement. Mr. President, denial of justice to victims is an aggravating circumstance which hampers their ability to rebuild. We are firmly convinced that to better prevent and combat CRSV, we must stress the following: a survivor-focused approach, protection of survivors, strengthening survivors' resilience, as well as justice and reparations. Tending to the invisible wounds of war and armed conflicts by giving victims mental health care services and psychosocial support, which they sorely need. These are the ways in which we can decisively move towards realizing our shared aspiration, that is, delivering a world where peace reigns for present and future generations. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Gabon for her statement, and I now invite the representative of Albania. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. President, and let me thank the UK Presidency for organising this open debate on such a critical issue. I thank SRSG Patten for her presentation, and we pay tribute to her continuous efforts to advance the conflict-related sexual violence agenda, despite difficulties and challenges. Your mandate and work as SRSG are not only important, they are indispensable and must be supported and strengthened as your mission embodies the hopes of countless survivors for justice. We are grateful to the civil society briefers for bringing their perspectives in the Council and helping us to better grasp the painful realities on the ground. Let me recognise particularly the active role played by the UK and personally by Lord Ahmad for the special and continued attention on this issue, including through far-reaching initiatives and projects, including the one that was presented here. Mr. President, when conflicts begin, so do violations and crimes, including the terror and devastation of sexual violence. As we heard, the world continues to experience the shocks of bodies of women and girls becoming battlegrounds. Like bombs and missiles that blow up residential areas, schools and kindergarten, sexual violence in conflict used as a weapon of war assaults human bodies, scars minds, undermines the fabric of humanity and inflicts immeasurable suffering to victims. It is unbearable and a stain in our collective efforts and commitments to respect human rights and uphold the moral grounds of the values we cherish. Over the years, the Council has passed several resolutions condemning sexual violence in conflict and emphasizing the need for accountability. Yet, despite robust normative framework, conflict-related sexual violence against women and girls continues to persist in many parts of the world, used as a weapon to punish civilians, humiliate adversaries, and terrorize communities. This is what has or is happening in many war-torn parts of the world, from Afghanistan to Syria, from Haiti to Sudan and South Sudan, from Myanmar to Mali, in the DRC, CAR, and Libya. In Ukraine, reports of women, girls, and children raped by the Russian forces are a painful and appalling testimony of outspread atrocities and severe violations of human rights committed in an unjust, illegal, and absurd war. Truth may be hard to swallow, but facts are always stubborn. Mr. President, the cases mentioned and many others are a testimony of the huge gap between the normative framework developed over years and the actual implementation on the ground. And Nadine, and no, you are right. There are laws, but we need to enforce them. There are tools, but we need to make proper use of them. And one fundamental issue is the difficulty to hold all perpetrators accountable. Despite clear condemnations and call for prosecution, far too many individuals responsible for sexual violence manage to evade justice. High levels of impunity perpetrate a culture of violence and undermine efforts to eradicate CRSV comprehensively. Another crucial gap lies in the still insufficient access to support services for survivors. While resolutions emphasize the need for health care, psychological support, and legal aid, the realities on the ground often fall short. Many survivors lack access to these essential services, including sexual and reproductive services, thereby hindering their recovery and reintegration into society. Furthermore, and worse, social stigmatization and cultural barriers prevent many survivors from seeking assistance, exacerbating the challenges they face. We must do more and better and take decisive steps in this regard. And as always, work starts at home. Member states must strengthen their national legal frameworks to effectively criminalize CRSVs and ensure that the perpetrators are brought to justice. Internationally, we may need to go beyond resolutions. We must come to a consensus and consider sexual violence in conflict at par with prohibited weapons, such as biological and chemical ones. Given the pervasiveness of such atrocities in almost every conflict and war context, exploring other options for multilateral and global support and action including the possibility of a convention, is worth the time and efforts. It would, in our view, be a valuable investment in what we are visibly missing: prevention. Peacekeeping missions should prioritize prevention and response to CRSVs. Also, increased funding for survival support should be directed towards programs that provide comprehensive assistance, including physical and mental health care, legal aid, and economic empowerment. In particular, better efforts should be made to ensure inclusivity and accessibility for those who are always the primary targets in conflicts: marginalized and vulnerable groups, women with disabilities, and members of the LGBTQ+ community. Mr. President, I would like to thank the Secretary General and SRSG Patten for including Kosovo in the annual report. No matter when and where they have happened, sexual-related crimes should never be left unattended. The severe physical and psychological trauma experienced by the victims should never be ignored, excused, downplayed, or forgotten. We strongly believe that the report will constitute a robust instrument to monitor and document on an annual basis the progress that Kosovo authorities and institutions have made in documenting those crimes and in addressing their legacy by integrating a survivor-centered approach at the heart of all their programs and interventions. In conclusion, Mr. President, addressing CRSV requires collective action, strong political will, and sustained commitment at all levels. Women and girls everywhere are not war spoils. They have inherent rights to be safe, to live in peace and with dignity, to enjoy freedom and equality. Therefore, we must do everything we can to bring perpetrators to justice, support survivors on their path to recovery, and ultimately advance towards creating a world free from the horrors of sexual violence and exploitation. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania for their statements, and I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank you for convening this debate on a matter of extreme importance. I'm also grateful for the information provided by the Special Representative Pramila Patten and for the testimonies and recommendations of the civil society briefers. President, we are concerned by the information provided in the Secretary General's report for 2022 on conflict-related sexual violence in 17 cases, which shows us how far we still have to go. We deplore the use of sexual violence as a tactic of war against women, children, and the LGBTIQ+ population by state and non-state armed groups, terrorist groups, private security companies, mercenaries, and criminal gangs. Fear of stigma, rejection, or isolation, or the lack of professional support makes this one of the crimes with the highest rates of impunity within and outside conflict contexts. We urge all states to adopt specific measures to curb sexual violence in conflict, in line with Resolution 1325. Further, we support the efforts of the Informal Expert Group on Women, Peace and Security to provide verified information enabling the Council to understand the situations and guide its action. The matter that we are addressing today shouldn't be limited to a periodic debate. Just this morning, for instance, we adopted the resolution presented by Ecuador and the United States, renewing and strengthening the mandate of the United Nations Integrated Office in Haiti. In that resolution, the Council condemns the rise of sexual and gender-based violence. It expresses its concern at its use by gangs in Haiti, and it insists that BNU's Human Rights Unit should have a specific capacity to be able to address sexual violence, including through the appointment of protection advisors. President, I'll now proceed to set out a few specific points for the consideration of the Council and Member States. First, the prevention, protection and monitoring must be included in all mandates and planning efforts that require it. Second, the drivers of violence rooted in structures of domination and power must be overcome. Third, we should consider intersectional protocols providing care to victims, including mental health and priority attention for survivors of sexual violence in conflict. 4. Early warning and the promotion of a culture of prevention through training, inclusion, and the full participation of women must be prioritized. 5. Accountability is the best deterrent mechanism. Survivors must be provided with access to the legal tools available in national legal systems and in international bodies. 6. It's essential to build networks, such as the network of women mediators or peace ambassadors that take into account ethnic, cultural, and other forms of identities that bring together the needs, perspectives, and aspirations of survivors. Finally, the lessons learned from cases such as comfort women in Asia, the victims of sexual violence in Colombia or in countries of Africa or Europe, point to the need to explore measures that would intensify the Council's efforts, favor the reconstruction of the social fabric, the recovery of trust, and providing reparations to victims, which is indispensable to achieving true and sustainable peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, dear colleagues, I thank the United Kingdom for organizing today's debate and the briefers for their comprehensive presentations. Brazil seizes this opportunity to commend Special Representative Pramila Patten and her office for their crucial work and commitment to combating sexual violence in conflict. I also thank civil society briefers for their testimonials. Civil society plays a key role in working with victims of conflict-related sexual violence, giving them ways to move forward after being target of such an abhorrent crime. I salute the meaningful presence of so many representatives of countries also deeply concerned and engaged in this issue. Mr. President, sexual violence adds an extra layer of suffering to the already dreadful reality of war. It inflicts long-lasting psychological trauma on victims, destroying social fabric and jeopardizing efforts towards peace and development. Over 15 years since the unanimous adoption of Resolution 1820, 2008, the United Nations has accomplished some advances in addressing this issue. For instance, the establishment of the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict and the launch of the Framework for the Prevention of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence in September 2022. The Commission of Sexual Violence in Conflict is directly related to impunity, which unfortunately remains usual in most conflicts. Holding offenders accountable should be the bare minimum response provided by states. Delivering justice to victims sends a clear message of zero tolerance with such crimes and helps to prevent their recurrence. Yet the Secretary General report sheds light on the need to invest financial as well as human resources to support embattled states in providing justice. The process, which culminated with the inauguration of the ad hoc tribunal in Guinea-Conakry, shows the need of such investment. Another key measure to ensure accountability and to provide lasting peace is including references to the situation of those who have been subjected to sexual violence during conflict and its aftermath in peace agreements and post-conflict arrangements. As shown in the framework for the prevention of conflict-related sexual violence, gender-based violence drivers such as patriarchal norms and rules, gender inequality, as well as gender discriminatory laws and rules, to name a few, play a key role in inciting the commission of these crimes. Thus, states should also address these drivers in their efforts against conflict-related sexual violations. For instance, by promoting full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in decision-making processes and peace talks. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Malta.
President, I begin by thanking the United Kingdom for convening today's open debate. We also thank Special Representative Pramila Patten and the briefers, Ms. Hser and Nadine, for their courageous calls to action and clear recommendations. As a tactic of war, torture and terrorism, sexual violence shatters the lives of survivors, their families and communities. In the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, armed groups use sexual violence to control territory and natural resources as attacks in and around internally displaced camps escalate. In Ukraine, large-scale displacement has increased trafficking for the purposes of sexual exploitation. In Haiti, gangs regularly kidnap women and girls, while arbitrary arrests in Myanmar have separated children from their parents, increasing their risk of forced marriage and human trafficking. Verified incidents in South Sudan doubled in 2022. Conflict-related sexual violence is often directed at human rights defenders, while in Colombia, illegal armed groups enforce patriarchal social norms through violence by targeting LGBTQI persons. States have an obligation to ensure a safe, enabling environment for civil society and to protect women active in public life from reprisals. We are deeply concerned that the Taliban's relentless and systematic gender persecution in Afghanistan has created an environment of pervasive impunity. The glaring gap between the Security Council's standards and commitments to prevent and respond to conflict-related sexual violence and the horrifying reality for victims and survivors must be closed. In this respect, we would like to highlight three priorities. First, preventing conflict-related sexual violence and improving protection requires survivor-centered approaches that ensure access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health services and strengthen the capacity of women and survivor-led organizations. This is especially crucial when health services are attacked, as reported in Sudan, where women and girls on the move are being terrorized by sexual and gender-based violence. It requires effective partnerships and trust between local communities and the UN. It also requires the deployment of women's protection advisors to all relevant situations of concern. Furthermore, gender must be incorporated systematically into risk assessments, monitoring and reporting, operational and tactical planning, budgets, and concepts of operation. Second, by stopping the illicit transfer and trade of weapons and ammunition to non-state actors, mercenary groups and individuals, we can counteract the growing links between militarization and sexual violence and exploitation. Third, the Security Council can more proactively use targeted sanctions against those who perpetrate and direct sexual violence in conflict. We fully support the SRSG's recommendation that the Council ensures conflict-related sexual violence is monitored systematically. We firmly believe that targeted sanctions can be used effectively to deter the commission of violence by all parties, including mercenaries and private military and security companies. More than 70% of the parties listed in the SRSG's report are persistent perpetrators. These verified cases should be aligned with the work of sanctions committees and their panels of experts, who should have access to this data and expertise on conflict-related sexual violence. Briefings by the Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict to sanctions committees can greatly facilitate this important work. President, all member states have a role to play in strengthening accountability and fostering a gender-responsive security sector. This cannot be done without responding to structural gender inequality and harmful social norms. As a shared commitment holder on women, peace and security, Malta reaffirms its commitment to advancing these priorities. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, at the outset, I would like to thank the United Kingdom for organizing this important debate and its unwavering dedication to the cause of ending sexual violence and conflict once and for all. I would also like to thank Lord Ahmad for presiding over this meeting. I also thank Special Representative Patten for her detailed briefing today and reaffirm our full support for her mandate and the tireless work of her office. We listened carefully to Ms. Na and Ms. Nadine, and I want to thank Ms. Nadine in particular for sharing her personal and heart-wrenching testimony with us today. The voices and recommendations of survivors are critical for this Council's work. The United Arab Emirates condemns all acts of sexual and gender-based violence, particularly in conflict. As co-chair of the informal expert group on women, peace and security, alongside Switzerland, and as a member of the International Alliance on Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict, a UK-led initiative, the UAE remains a steadfast partner in strengthening the global response to these crimes. 15 years have passed since this very council adopted Resolution 1820, which condemned sexual violence as a tactic of war and an obstacle to peace building. Since then, the international community has taken important steps, but much remains to be done. In this regard, I wish to share 3 points today. First, we need to bolster survivors' access to necessary services and support. This requires taking into consideration the needs of women and girls, from early warning mechanisms to humanitarian aid provision. These efforts can only be successful if carried out with a whole-of-society approach throughout the entire conflict continuum. We must include women and youth, as well as religious, community, and education leaders in the design and implementation of gender-responsive strategies. These, in turn, can act as one of the key pathways to the prevention of such crimes. This is critical across ongoing conflicts, including the Democratic Republic of Congo and Sudan, where we continue to receive increasing reports of conflict-related sexual violence. Second, prevention of these crimes demands strengthened national judicial institutions and consistent implementation of the rule of law. National authorities with robust judicial institutions stand a much better chance of countering sexual and gender-based violence. This could certainly be the case in Haiti, where gangs employ these heinous acts as a weapon to terrorize, abuse, and control populations. The UN's capacity-building expertise should also be leveraged to bolster survivor-centered justice and accountability. This includes supporting those who are uniquely positioned to engage with national government entities, such as peace operations, as well as engaging with entities with expertise, such as the UN team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence. Close cooperation with the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict and UN Women can also strengthen global norms and standards for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. To this end, I'm pleased to share that last month, the UAE renewed its commitment to UN Women and pledged an additional $15 million over the next 3 years. Third, we must utilize technology and education to combat the shifting nature of these crimes. In recent years, the threat has metastasized from a physical threat to one that pervades the online space. When the threats evolve, so too must our tools to protect against them. We do not need to be overly creative. Even commonly used digital technologies such as WhatsApp can provide access to reporting mechanisms and protection networks. Echoing Shabana Basij Rasikh during the Afghanistan briefing last month, ensuring equal accessibility to technology can be a lifeline to women and girls at risk. Education must also be deployed to tackle the root causes of these crimes, such as gender discrimination, hate speech, and incitement to violence. Education has the potential to promote gender equality and eliminate stigma. Just last month, the Council unanimously adopted Resolution 2686, co-led by the UAE and the UK, which urged member states to support quality education that promotes the principles of tolerance to prevent sexual and gender-based violence. Mr. President, to conclude, we have seen promising progress. In the normative framework, there are women's protection advisors in UN peace operations, and these abhorrent crimes are included as a listing criterion in various UN sanctions regimes. Reparations for survivors, as well as increased access to data, also speak to the direction of travel of our efforts. By enhancing our commitment and advancing these gains, the international community can better address these heinous crimes and provide women and girls with the protection and dignity they need and deserve. We have the mechanisms in place. It is high time for their implementation. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Mr. President, I thank you for convening this important open debate on conflict-related sexual violence and SRSG Patten and the civil society representatives for their comprehensive briefings. Sexual violence in conflict is a serious crime that violates human dignity and consequently threatens international peace and security. Japan is deeply concerned with the latest Secretary General's report, pointing out the alarming persistence of sexual violence and weakening of the rule of law in countries in conflict such as Afghanistan, CAR, DRC, Ethiopia, Haiti, South Sudan, and Ukraine. In the context of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, we profoundly regret that the United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine and the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine have documented in detail and brought to light the distressing reality of sexual violence as a method of torture and inhumane treatment inflicted upon innocent civilians and prisoners of war. In this regard, it is welcoming that Ms. Patten signed a framework of cooperation with the government of Ukraine to prevent and respond to conflict-related sexual violence. Mr. President, Japan has consistently demonstrated its proactive stance in addressing CRSV and has adhered to pertinent Security Council resolutions. We firmly believe that establishing robust judicial institutions and holding perpetrators accountable is crucial in deterring CRSV, a principle emphasized in numerous resolutions, including Resolution 2467. To translate this belief into action, Japan has played a pivotal role in supporting the operation of the International Criminal Court and stands as its largest financial contributor. Since 2014, Japan has also lent support to the team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence in conflict, operating under the Office of the SRSG-SVC. Through this engagement, Japan has actively bolstered the judiciaries in countries like the DRC, Central Africa, Somalia, and Iraq, with the aim of enabling effective prosecutions of perpetrators. One of the concrete outcomes through these efforts is the implementation of charges against the leaders of an armed group following a mobile court hearing in the DRC. Recognizing the significance of addressing the practical needs of survivors who continue to endure immense suffering, Japan places utmost importance on providing timely and comprehensive assistance. We have supported CRSV survivors through initiatives such as UN Action Against Sexual Violence in Conflict, focusing on areas like psychosocial care and access to justice, whose invaluable works are currently displayed in the South Lobby under the title A Conflict-Related Sexual Violence Survivor's Journey. Additionally, Japan actively contributes to multilateral frameworks, including the Global Fund for Survivors of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence and the Trust Fund for Victims of the ICC. I am pleased to emphasize that endeavors mentioned above are well represented in a key component of Japan's Third National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, which was unveiled in April of this year. Furthermore, This recent action plan specifically acknowledges the importance of providing support to survivors, encompassing individuals of all genders, including males and those who identify as gender non-conforming. We are committed to the implementation of the action plan in a transparent manner by ensuring periodic external evaluations and feedback from civil society. Mr. President, a holistic response to CRSV requires cooperation across member states, the UN system, CSOs, and other stakeholders. Japan demonstrated this cooperation by successfully co-facilitating the General Assembly Resolution 76/304 on international cooperation for access to justice, remedies, and assistance for survivors of sexual violence. In conclusion, Japan will continue to make its utmost efforts to eliminate CRSV, including by promoting the implementation of relevant Security Council resolutions wherever they take place. As has been stated by today's civil society representatives, our approach should be consistent, no double standard. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the Special Representative of the Secretary-General, Ms. Patten, and our briefers for their sustained commitment in this field. I'd also like to express my thanks to the United Kingdom for its leadership and engagement in this particularly important topic on which you're convening a meeting today. And I pay tribute to all states active in bringing an end to sexual violence, working in favour of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. I'll now insist on 4 points. Firstly, I'd like to reiterate our full support to the mandate of the Special Representative. Your role in alert and impartial documentation is essential. Human dignity and the interest of women and girls must always come first. We continue to ensure that CRSV is taken into account in the Council's monitoring of conflicts. We share in the concerns expressed in the Secretary-General's latest report on sexual violence in conflict. As recently as 2023, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine resulted in sexual violence being used as a weapon of war and torture against women, men, and children. The report also documents abuses committed in the DRC, Sudan, Myanmar, and in numerous other parts of the world. And we heard recently about the situation in Haiti in this regard. France condemns this violence and expresses its solidarity with the victims. Secondly, we must collectively combat impunity. Faced with this violence, we must follow a zero-tolerance policy. The perpetrators of these abuses must be held to account. The United Nations documentation and investigations by international and national courts are essential in this respect. We support the work of the International Criminal Court here, and we support the court with human and financial resources. The Secretary-General's report mentions how essential it is to deploy specialists to protect victims and to analyse and investigate sexual violence in conflict. We support the inclusion of these concerns in all peace operations. This Council must also use all tools at its disposal, and particularly sanctions against the perpetrators of sexual violence. Sanctions indeed represent a deterrence measure that must be used. We support your role, Madam SRSG, appearing before sanctions committees. Third, we stand with the victims and survivors of sexual violence. Treatment must be comprehensive and survivors must have access to it, including when legal proceedings are inaccessible or blocked. That's why France is providing €8.2 million to the Global Fund for Survivors of CRSV, set up by Denis Mukwege and Nadia Murad. 4. To prevent sexual violence and its consequences, we must enhance women's participation and combat gender inequality and sexist prejudice and stereotypes. The physical and psychological consequences of such violence affects the impacted societies and leave their mark on several generations. The full, complete and meaningful participation of women in all decision-making, in peace negotiations and in all areas is essential to satisfactorily deliver justice and ensure reparations owed to the victims of sexual violence, which is needed to achieve reconciliation. This Council has clearly identified this with its Women, Peace and Security agenda, which must be implemented. Together, we must step up our efforts in this area, looking ahead to the Summit for the Future in 2024. Preventing sexual violence also means attacking discrimination, as I said, prejudice and stereotypes. The rise in sexist, misogynist or homophobe hate speech heightens the risk of sexual and gender-based violence. Finally, we must adopt the most protective rules possible in combating violence against women. We advocate for the universalization of the Council of Europe's Istanbul Convention. This is a modern and protective international instrument to counter violence against women. It also applies during times of armed conflict. We are delighted to see that the number of new accessions to the convention has increased over the last 2 years. Madam SRSG, dear Hser, dear Nadine, rest assured that the fight against sexual violence will remain at the heart of France's priorities within this Council. We will ensure the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security resolutions and also the availability of necessary resources for teams on the ground. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, Mozambique wishes to express our profound gratitude to the United Kingdom Presidency for organizing this timely and important open debate. We also praise UK's leadership on this matter. We extend our deep appreciation for the comprehensive briefings by the SRSG, Pramila Patten, and the civil society briefers. Mr. President, we would like to start by reaffirming Mozambique's condemnation in the strongest terms, the gender-based violence in general, and conflict-related sexual violence in particular. It constitutes a war crime and a crime against humanity, as recognized, among others, by Security Council Resolution 1820 of 2008, by the Protocol of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, on the rights of women in Africa, also known as the Maputo Protocol. The Secretary General's report on conflict-related sexual violence highlights that the crime persisted and deepened in different parts of the world. It continued to be a tactic of war and terrorism. This is a horrific practice that unfortunately prevails despite the international and regional frameworks. It shows the extent of commitment and action that are required to counter the full scale of the problem. It is therefore with great concern that we see women's and girls' rights continue to be seriously jeopardized and violated. Conflict-related sexual violence disproportionately affects this segment of the society. Refugees and internally displaced people from armed conflicts are also mostly women, girls, and children, as well as people with disabilities and elderly. They are exposed to heightened risks to conflict-related sexual violence. Mr. President, as expressed by His Excellency Felipe Jacinto Nyusi, President of the Republic of Mozambique, during the Security Council's open debate on the protection of civilians held in May this year, the first step towards ending conflict-related sexual violence has to be the cessation of hostilities in all conflicts. Peace is the ultimate guarantee of civilian security. We must therefore take stock of the existing international, regional, and national tools to tackle the root causes of prevailing conflicts. We are aware, however, that making peace or building peace takes its own time and pace. But conflict-related sexual violence cannot be accepted as an inevitable cost of armed conflict. Therefore, all available tools, including legal, policy, diplomatic, and financial, must be mobilized to prevent and mitigate its effects. Mr. President, the implementation of international, regional, and national legal instruments to prevent and address conflict-related sexual violence is of paramount importance. The United Nations and other relevant stakeholders have a pivotal role to continue their support with concrete actions to prevent conflict-related violence all over the world. In this regard, we welcome the efforts made by governments around the world as outlined in the Secretary General's report. We commend their commitment in implementing their legal frameworks with regard to conflict-related sexual violence. Mr. President, in order to address conflict-related sexual violence, it is crucial that we develop holistic approaches. In this regard, we would like to underline the following points. One, we deem it important to adopt and strengthen the existing international legislation at national levels with a focus on investigation and prosecution of perpetrators of conflict-related violence. Two, there is a need to increase training programs for state and civil society actors in matters related to international, regional, and national frameworks on conflict-related sexual violence. Three, we must strengthen the capacity of the justice sector at the national level to identify and assess information on conflict-related violence. Four, we advocate allocating resources for the implementation of national action plans on women, peace, and security. This could strengthen the potential of these instruments through budgeted operational provisions to address the issue. Mr. President, to conclude, Mozambique reiterates its firm commitment to continue implementing measures that can contribute to our collective action in addressing conflict-related sexual violence. It is our conviction that women and girls, the most affected by these criminal acts, can play themselves a transformative role in political, socio-economic, and peace processes. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement. Let me remind all speakers to limit their statements to no more than 3 minutes in order to enable the Council to carry out its work expeditiously. I now give the floor to the representative of Canada.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm very pleased to speak on behalf of 66 members of the Group of Friends of Women, Peace and Security, an informal network that represents all 5 regional groups at the UN as well as the EU. I'd like to highlight 4 points. First of all, we categorically condemn the use of sexual and gender-based violence by state and non-state actors in situations of humanitarian crises and conflict-affected settings. Sexual violence, which disproportionately affects women and girls, is not only a human rights violation, it is also an abhorrent act of cruelty, a significant impediment to peace, and an expression of gender equality. We are deeply concerned by the persistent and widespread use of sexual violence and related impunity in many conflict-affected settings, as outlined by the Secretary General in his report. We call on all parties to respect international law and all relevant Security Council resolutions and to immediately cease all forms of sexual and gender-based violence. Second, we need to ensure that the victims and survivors at the heart of all our efforts to respond to conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence. Victims and survivors have different needs, different perspectives, and can face multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and stigmatization. We must ensure that their human rights are protected and promoted, that they are treated with dignity and respect, are able to obtain access to justice and equality, holistic and comprehensive survivor-centered services, including sexual and reproductive health care services, mental health support, as well as counseling and legal services. But above all, we must ensure that the victims' voices are heard and listened to and heeded. Third, impunity for these crimes must end. Those responsible for such acts must be held accountable. The onus is on all of us to strengthen the rule of law and to ensure that there is independent investigation of and prosecution for conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence. Fourth, we urge the Security Council to use all its tools to support action against conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence as a tactic of war, as a deliberate tactic of war. We strongly encourage the Council to ensure that country mandates emphasize the prevention and the monitoring and response to conflict-related sexual violence. Finally, we encourage the Security Council to invite the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence to regularly brief the Sanctions Committee on this critical question. It is time for urgent action to prevent and respond to conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence and to ensure holistic, comprehensive, survivor-centered, and trauma-informed responses. Si je peux dire seulement un.
If I can just say one single word in my capacity as representative of Canada, for us, the most important thing is that we should listen to the experiences of all survivors. We shouldn't just be listening to their experiences, but also acting in response to what we've heard and what we've seen. This includes women, girls, men, groups, and also members of the LGBTIQ+ community. Canada is determined to continue its work with survivors. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of Canada for their statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Silvio Gonçalves, Deputy Head of the European Union Delegation to the United Nations.
Thank you, President. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states, the candidate countries North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova and Bosnia-Herzegovina, the potential candidate country Georgia, as well as Andorra, Monaco and San Marino align themselves with this statement. We reaffirm our long-standing and unwavering commitment to eliminating sexual and gender-based violence in all its forms, in times of peace and times of war. Conflict-related sexual violence is a war crime and a blatant violation of international law, a global threat that knows no borders. We strongly support the work and mandate of SRSG-Patten. The report presented today is crucial to shed light on the continued and escalated levels of CRSV, much of which remains underreported and unpunished. We acknowledge and applaud the work of women's civil society organizations who are often the first responders in war and conflict. While under-resourced and deplorably targeted with reprisals, they deliver the support and services that the public and private sector often are not able to provide, including in response to sexual violence. We note with deep concern the use of rape as a tool for oppression, repression, and political intimidation across a number of countries, and the widespread reported use of sexual violence by state actors, such as the Russian armed forces in Ukraine, as well as the increasing trend of sexual violence used by mercenary and private military and security companies in countries like Mali, Myanmar, South Sudan, and Ukraine. These crimes must be punished, and those responsible held accountable. It is the responsibility of all states to prevent and address CRSV and bring perpetrators to justice. The redress for this type of violence needs to be linked to transitional justice processes. At the same time, we need to resolutely implement the international framework that is in place to address these abhorrent crimes and back up our political declarations with action. EU support to eliminating and addressing sexual violence in conflict and emergencies is notable, with projects incorporating response to CRSV amounting to over 100 million euros, and with EU missions and operations continuing to address CGBV, including CRSV, within the scope of their mandates. This year, the EU also has imposed sanctions on individuals and entities in view of their role in committing serious human rights violations and abuses, in particular sexual and gender-based violence. Sexual violence in conflict obliterates humanity. We stand ready to work with the international community to end the impunity of perpetrators, tackle the institutional culture that tolerates the use of sexual violence, and to guarantee access to justice, reparation, and redress for survivors, as well as to reintegration and livelihood. This includes provision of comprehensive sexual and reproductive healthcare services and strengthening of sexual and reproductive health measures as an integral part of compliance with the CRSV frameworks by everyone, the UN and its agencies, but also governments. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Gonzato for his statement. There are still a number of speakers remaining on my list for this meeting. I intend, with the concurrence of members of the Council, to suspend the meeting until 3 p.m. The meeting is suspended.